بسم الله والصلاه والسلام على رسول الله. السلام عليكم ورحمه الله وبركاته. ثم علمنا ينفعنا وكان بما علمتنا زدنا علما. So we are very thankful to the CITC. We are very thankful to Dr. Abdullah Al-Juhani, Mr. Moath Al-Manea, and Mr. Ayman Moath, who thankfully agreed to come virtually and give us a lecture on spectrum management in Saudi Arabia. So Dr. Abdullah Al-Juhani is a research and innovation consultant and associate in CITC and associate professor in King Abdulaziz University. He got his PhD from University of Southampton in 2016, MSc University of Southampton in 2010, and Bachelor of Engineering from University of Abdulaziz in 2006. And also we have Mr. Moath Al-Manea, who is the Director of Spectrum Planning and National Cooperation in CITC. He is the Director of the Planning and National Cooperation at the Communication and Information Commission, which is the CITC. No? You cannot hear me?
لا نفضل يا دكتور قبل شوي لا نفضل
كده أفضل أوكي. Mr. Moath is responsible for managing the national frequency plan in Saudi Arabia and supervising the execution of Saudi Arabia National Spectrum Strategy. He's also administrating the National Spectrum Coordination Committee, which is responsible for managing on a national level the use of spectrum across all sectors in KSA. Prior to that, Mr. Moath has worked as a telecommunication quality of service engineer in CITC, monitoring the quality of service provided to consumers. He also worked as a technology standardization engineer in charge of researching and building radio standards for different services. He also participated in several projects related to 5G rollout, enabling IoT application, and fostering public Wi-Fi deployment in the kingdom. He also participated in a number of key IoT conferences. We also have Mr. Ayman Maghrabi, who is the Director of Radio Allocation and Licensing at CITC. He is a wireless communication engineer with experience in planning, designing, and implementing physical communication networks to support oil and gas application, public safety communication, and civil applications. He has a Bachelor in Engineering from KFUPM with first honors, Master's also from KFUPM, and a Master in Telecommunication from University of Sydney. So I will leave the floor to Dr. Abdullah Al-Juhani and Mr. Moath and Mr. Ayman to start their presentation.
Thank you, Dr. Hisham. Thank you, Dr. Ali, and thank you all for attending. First, I'd like to thank KFUPM for giving us the floor to share our experience and knowledge. This started as a simple discussion on a 1-hour webinar, but it evolved to have a bigger audience, and we are thankful to KFUPM for giving us that opportunity. Again, my name is Ayman Maghrabi, and my colleagues Dr. Abdullah Al-Juhani and Dr. Moath Al-Manea from CITC will be sharing with you a webinar on the spectrum management and spectrum management aspects in Saudi Arabia specifically. Just give me 1 second to share my screen. Okay. Spectrum management in Saudi Arabia. I'll just go over a brief outline on what we planned for today. We will start discussing the basic principles of spectrum management. And I'm sure the people attending physically are taking this course part of their curriculum. And so they might know some of this information, but it's good to reiterate it. Then we will discuss the role of CITC as the national spectrum manager in Saudi Arabia. Then we'll go more forward into the spectrum management on the global scale and how all of the regulators interconnect with each other. We will then discuss the national spectrum strategy set by CITC until the year 2025. And after that, we will highlight some of the major accomplishments and works done by CITC for this year. Starting with the principles of spectrum management. So what is spectrum and what is spectrum management? Any wireless communication needs to have a certain frequency, part of the spectrum, to operate and send data. And the spectrum is limited. It's only from 30 Hertz to 300 gigahertz. And after that, we have the infrared and the optical communication that needs spectrum needs to use it somehow. And spectrum is characterized by a few points. So first, it's renewable, meaning that you can reuse it under certain conditions. However, it's not infinite. So there is a limited and finite number of frequencies that you can assign. Frequencies by nature, or signals propagating using certain frequencies by nature, are transcends borders. So they will cause interference into other countries, and this is something that we need to take into account. Characteristics of different wavelengths, different frequencies, all play a part in how the wave propagates, what's its suitable application. So we have 10 kilohertz, for example, AM radio that it's suitable for such application, while Earth space communication need a higher bandwidth. It's all part of the spectrum characteristics, and this is the physics behind it. We have here some examples on some applications. I'm sure most of you, you have seen it somehow. All of us, our cell phones utilize spectrum, weather forecasting, getting the weather on your phones, future applications in precision agriculture, TV broadcasting, and so on. And these are some of the applications that use spectrum. And here we have a bigger view on the areas where spectrum is very critical. As we mentioned, weather forecast, aviation transportation, especially in marine and aviation, to communicate with the ground stations, to airports, to coordinate. Same with the maritime. We also have defense applications that rely heavily on using spectrum. And we also have meteorological and science services that really require certain parts of the spectrum that are suitable for such applications. And again, climate research. So this is just a brief overview on what is spectrum and what is spectrum management. It's ensuring that all of these operate together without interfering and affecting each other. Again, why do we need spectrum management? Spectrum management is a national resource that's limited by nature. So we need to manage it in such a way that we maximize the benefit. Management is also related to protecting critical applications and critical users and ensuring that they do not interfere with one another. Spectrum has a high economic value to the country and to the country's GDP. And also management is needed because we need to reuse this resource as much as we can to maximize the benefit. This is just, we have a brief here comparison between spectrum and other resources that we physically see compared to spectrum where we just visualize it. So we are comparing here with the land, oil, and water. So spectrum and land are varied. So we have big spectrum on where you take it. Oil and water are almost the same resource. They don't change much in quality. And we can see that scarcity is common among all of them. It's a finite resource. It can be made more productive with more efficient using, most of them. Spectrum is it has a renewable factor to it that we can reuse it. But compared to other exports or resources, we cannot store it for future use, such like oil and water. We cannot export it. However, there is a benefit to trading this, as we will see more when we talk about the regulations. Now, why we need to manage the spectrum, but we need to understand how do we set the access to the spectrum. So on the left, we have some factors that play a key role into setting the expectation for supply, demand, and deciding what spectrum, how much spectrum should cost. So we have social benefits. So we have applications that are for public safety. For such applications, we need to consider that they should not be, the spectrum for that should not be high, the spectrum cost. Also, the characteristics of the radio waves, some waves propagate farther, so they should maybe have a higher premium cost compared to other spectrum that dies very quickly. We have enabling emerging technologies. So we as a regulator look into enabling new technologies supporting Industrial Revolution 4.0 and digital transformation. And we take that into consideration when setting the price. And commercial feasibility is a critical part. So if if a service is not commercially feasible, this takes us into a different path when considering the licensing aspect. Also, another fact that affects the overall formula is the availability or scarcity. So as there is more use and growth in application and demand for data, the scarcity, it becomes very limited. So we need we don't have much resources to serve all of this demand. Regulatory schemes, for example, they help bring the scarcity down a little and ensure more spectrum is available. On the other hand, we also see everything now is going towards wireless, smart homes and all of that. This also drives the need further up. So we have less resources available. And technology-wise, we are seeing more innovation in terms of research, where we are using more antennas, getting more efficiency, getting more bits per second for each megahertz. And this also drives the scarcity down. So all of these parts play a huge role in deciding how we decide how spectrum is accessed. So generally speaking, we have three types of spectrum access. We have either licensed access, where a user is licensed to use specific part of the spectrum. We have exclusive use for that spectrum, and it ensures long-term certainty for investments. So such applications can go from 15 to 20 years to use exclusive rights on the spectrum. Another aspect is the license exempt, where we don't impose a license on the frequency, but there might be technical conditions such as power limitations, interference mitigation measures. And this is most commonly seen in Wi-Fi, where you don't need a network expert to set it up. It's self-managed, self-deployable. And having this as license exempt allows us to further expand Wi-Fi network, expand distributing internet services, and improving the social well-being of our society. And we have another approach where we call it lightly licensed. It's a hybrid approach where access to spectrum is, it needs a certain type of license, so you need to pay to access the spectrum. However, it's done in a manner that does not focus on getting maximum profit from the spectrum, more about enabling newer technologies, enabling certain applications such as IR 4.0. These are mainly the three types of spectrum access. Now, our role in CITC is this national spectrum manager. What we do is manage the spectrum on the national level and protect Saudi Arabia's interests on the regional and global scale. I would say that the main functions for spectrum management in Saudi Arabia falls under three main categories. We have planning, and then execution, and then monitoring. And all of these follow main regulations and acts, where we share some of them with you here. We have the Telecommunications Act. It's the bylaw that we follow. We have the frequency usage policies, which sets the prices based on the parameters indicated in them, such as antenna height, UHF or VHF, or other types of bands. And we have the national frequency plan. If you give me 1 minute here, I want to show you a web page on CITC where you can see the national frequency plan. So this is a comprehensive frequency plan that takes you all the way from 3 kilohertz to 300 gigahertz. It's a very detailed illustration that shows who can access such spectrum. So we have mainly three main usages or people who can access the spectrum. We have government, we have civil, and we have shared that spectrum that can be accessed by both. Here we have a general definition for type of services that are expected for these bands. This table can be this illustration can be very tough to follow, which is why the CITC has also developed a search engine that helps you navigate. So it's called the National Frequency Allocation Table Search Engine. It's all on the CITC webpage. So for example, if you want to see what 100 megahertz is used here in Saudi, so you can put 100 megahertz and let's say 120 megahertz. And if you search for that, it will take just a second, and then it will show you this band and or around that band. We have broadcasting, which is FM services for civil users, but we also have aeronautical services in this band, which is used by civil and government. So I just wanted to share with you briefly this very helpful tool that we published and we keep referring to always when you are managing the spectrum. This shows the overall cycle. So as we mentioned, we have planning, execution, and then evaluation. We'll start with planning and explain what happens in planning. So we set the strategy and policy that we follow, and then we work together collaboratively to govern these strategies. So for the national frequency plan we saw earlier is part of the planning aspect. We also set the national spectrum strategy, the NSSS. And then we set the regulation. So we put the laws, the standards that need to be followed for that spectrum, for that specific, application or specific band. After the planning phase, we have the execution, and this is done by the Radio Spectrum Services Department, General Management. We have the assignment and licensing, where we receive applications from users to assign them different types of services, whether it's IMT, International Mobile Telecommunication, 4G, 5G, aeronautical, maritime, and we also issue the spectrum fees through that department. This is the department that I'm heading, the assignment and licensing. We also have the international coordination, which is very critical as we have many countries on our border. And we need to ensure broadcasting and space services specifically are governed properly on the border. And finally, we have the evaluation phase, or we call it monitoring. So basically here, what we do is monitor the spectrum, ensure that people are following the license that their equipment is not, spilling on other bands. And part of that monitoring and feedback cycle, we collect data. And then we are using data analytics, such as the Spectrum Utilization Index, to decide this spectrum, is it being properly used in certain areas, or we can consider better plans for it in the future. And then the cycle repeats itself every few years, where you revise the plan and then execute and then evaluate. It all goes hand in hand to achieve proper spectrum management. Here I will leave the floor to my colleague Moath. He will take you through the spectrum management on the global scale and all the way to the strategy and our achievements. Moath, can you share your screen, or do you want me to continue with my screen?
I'll share my screen from my side.
Okay, I'll stop sharing. Thank you for listening. Moath will take it from here.
السلام عليكم، أسعد الله مساكم بكل خير. Thank you, Ayman. Thank KFUBM, Dr. Ali and Dr. Hisham for letting us have this opportunity to contribute to this webinar. I was happy actually when I heard that KFUBM created a Center for Wireless Communication and Sensing Technologies. Also, KFUBM is a pioneer in providing or offering such a course in spectrum management. This course emphasizes on the importance of wireless technologies to our daily lives. From the sections, I will go through the spectrum management on the global scale, how spectrum is managed through ITU and through regional groups. In addition, I will talk about the ongoing work in CITC and on the national level in the wireless spectrum. As a start, spectrum is managed on different scales. The first one, which is the local stage in the kingdom, CITC is the spectrum manager in the kingdom, and CITC arranged with all the national stakeholders within the kingdom to assign and allocate and coordinate their usage. On the regional group, there is a group called ASMG, the Arab Spectrum Management Group, that is responsible to coordinate and arrange the users on the regional group in the MENA region. As an international regulator for spectrum, as you know that spectrum is a cross-border, is crossing borders, and coordinating spectrum through the international scale is important. ITU is an UN organization and is responsible to organize and allocate spectrum on the international level. Within the ITU structure, there are 3 sectors within the ITU structure. One is responsible for standardization of the telecom devices and protocols. Other one is responsible for development of or bridging the gap within the developing countries. And the third sector, which we are more concerned of, is the radio communication sector. There are 3, I would call it, levels of frameworks or documents that regulate spectrum on the international level. One is the constitution of the ITU. The other one is the radio regulation, and the third one is the ITU recommendations. What are the difference between the 3 levels? The first one is the constitution is setting the high-level principles and rights of the different states of or the countries represented in the ITU. The second level is the radio regulation, which allocates spectrum for the different radio services. As you just saw that when my colleague Ayman shared the NFP on the CITC website, this allocation of spectrum to services is aligned with or harmonized with the radio regulation. The third level, the ITU recommendations, are technical standards and techniques to limit the interferences that might happen within the radio services. If we look at the ITU as a main tasks, there are 2 main tasks within the ITU in regards to spectrum. One is to coordinate and harmonize the uses of spectrum within the world. Manufacturers and service providers would benefit and be more concerned to align the different services in regards to spectrum. The other role of ITU is to coordinate and limit the interferences between countries. So in order to align the uses of spectrum on the global scale, ITU conduct a conference every 3 or 4 years called the World Radio Communication Conference. This conference is responsible to update the radio regulation that we just passed through and discuss the different radio services that everyone is concerned of. Usually the kingdom representing the CITC representing the kingdom in this conference, and with the contribution of the different stakeholders within the kingdom. So as you see that there are many services, radio services related to this conference, such as mobile or satellite, maritime, and other radio services. Between each conference and the other one, there are a study cycle for the different study groups that represent the final decision in the WRC. Within the study cycle, there are different topics that are discussed. One of them is the spectrum management. The other ones are as you can see, radio wave propagation, satellite services, and terrestrial services, and other services as well. So within this study cycle, every 3 or 4 years, different topics and issues are discussed among the different states or countries across the globe. The Kingdom participates in this conference with a team represented by different stakeholders in the Kingdom, depending on the concerned service or issue that each organization concerned with. This is on the regional. This is the regional groups. ITU has 6 almost regional groups, and Saudi Arabia is contributing to the Arab Spectrum ASMG, or the Arab Spectrum Management Group. Now we'll discuss about the national spectrum strategy and the current uses of spectrum or ongoing work within the Kingdom. As you saw, spectrum is a scarce resource that need to be managed carefully. Additionally, the radio services are emerging, and everyone is looking for a broadband service. This means more spectrum of need. So to align all of the different uses or needs in the Kingdom, CITC, in collaboration with the different stakeholders in the Kingdom, has made or has put a national spectrum strategy that align the different uses of spectrum in the different sectors, whether it was in commercial uses or in civil or in military or other services as well. Different stakeholders represent or need to be aligned, because spectrum bands share services as well as share the same users. So in order to make the best use of spectrum, CITC has consulted and prepared this national spectrum strategy. A vision of this strategy is to unlock the potential of radio communication for smarter and safer use. Smarter uses include the innovative uses, commercial uses, and safer uses. In safer future, refer to the defense and security use of spectrum. This strategy is based on 3 pillars or guiding principles. One of them is to enable the different radio services for the different stakeholders in the Kingdom. Other one is to manage spectrum efficiently. And third one is to engage and partner with the different stakeholders and build the capabilities and information systems. As a result of this spectrum strategy, we expect to decrease I would call it the artificial scarcity of spectrum, the unused allocated spectrum, and to increase therefore to increase the efficiency of the spectrum, besides to manage the spectrum efficiently and foster the commercial or foster the innovative uses that is basically established in the science and in the university as well. Here are some more implications for the strategy, which basically enables the different uses and manage spectrum efficiently and to build the capabilities. In the conclusion of this presentation, I would go through some of the ongoing projects and work that we at CITC are doing in regards to spectrum, to radio spectrum. One of them is the spectrum outlook that CITC early this year has published. This outlook includes the release of about 23 gigahertz of spectrum for the innovative and commercial uses, with a different of licensing schemes. 4 gigahertz for mobile services, and for the innovative and commercial license exempt services such as Wi-Fi, 6.2 gigahertz, as well as a shared or light licensing spectrum that is made available for more than one service. Here is a detailed description of the outlook with the spectrum bands and services that was released early this year. And for this licensing, we are following different licensing or access scheme. Some of them include auctions, or the other to include a direct licensing. Besides that, we have made with our partners in the kingdom or globally some of the trials that aim to enable the emerging wireless technologies, whether it was hubs, the high altitude platforms that mainly focus to deploy the mobile networks in a timely manner. Other is to, as you may hear, the Starlink or OneWeb that enables or offer the LEO broadband satellites which connect the rural areas. The other one is we have made a V2X trial in addition to the LEO IoT narrowband through satellite, as well as to offer or a trial to offer the air-to-ground communication that offers a broadband connection to aircrafts. As well, we have made a trial with our partners in regards to the Wi-Fi 6E. One main work that is ongoing, one of the big projects I would call it at CITC currently, is the monitoring project. This project aims to measure the efficiency of spectrum, as well as to detect the unauthorized use of spectrum, and to align between or gather the data of the spectrum use in the kingdom, and analyze this data in order to make based evident decisions. So this monitoring project includes fixed stations that is allocated different locations across the kingdom, and besides the portable stations and the unmanned stations, and a center for analyzing this data and reporting to the management in CITC. This was a conclusion of the presentation. It was my pleasure again to participate in this webinar. And if you have any questions, I will be happy, and Ayman as well, to answer these questions. Thank you. I'll give the floor to Dr. Hisham.
Okay, thank you very much for the presentation, Mr. Moath and Mr. Ayman. Very insightful and benefit to us. And also it's aligned with our course that we have taught. So I think we can take first the question from the audience here that are physically attending, and then we can take questions from the virtual audience that are joining through Zoom. So we'll take first from audience here.
Is my voice clear, Dr. Ali?
Voice clear?
Yes, it's clear.
Go ahead.
My question for Arabsat stakeholder, the satellite operator for the Arab region, which it's headquartered in Riyadh. Do you monitor their spectrum? Another question: what about their users? Like here in Saudi Arabia, there are so many users, including are registered with Arabsat. They are using the satellite communication. Do they register their spectrum, or do they register in CITC as users CITC for satellite spectrum for Arabsat operator?
Moath, do you want to take this one, or should I?
Okay. Yes. the kingdom or Saudi Arabia is the notifying, it's called the notifying country of satellite services in the kingdom. And yes, Saudi reports this usage to the ITU, and all the users are registered within the ITU. Why the ITU organize or regulate this service? Because obviously it's a cross-border service. So I hope this answers your question.
My question is about the half interference that run by individual users, not licensed operators of what.
So he's asking about harm of interference that caused by users, not operators, right?
Individuals.
Individuals. Okay.
Yes, like repeaters that was interference to signal network. How they monitor these actions?
Dr. Hisham, can you repeat the question from your
He's
side?
Yeah, he's asking about the individual users that may cause interference by using their own equipment, not like operators interfering with each other, but users using like some equipment that cause interference to STC or whatever other operators that have licensed spectrum.
Okay. Okay, I'll take that question if that's okay. So a major part of the CITC work and collaboration with customs is that any equipment that uses spectrum needs to be cleared in the customs. So if, for example, someone bought a 5G repeater, he's not authorized to use it. The customs would catch it and know that this is not, it's against the license in Saudi. They will not allow it in. So users are not allowed and they will cause interference. However, some devices get through customs one way or another, and this is where the monitoring that we have shown comes into play. So if someone uses a repeater, that will affect the base station for the IMT and even cause interference to other IMT users. They will file a request to us that we have interference in, for example, North Riyadh, and then our team for spectrum monitoring. They will either, if they have the center fixed stations capable of catching the signal there, or they can do field work. They will go and try to find the source of interference, and they do find many people, individuals in their houses. They use it, and they notify the authority responsible for contacting the people and forcing them to stop. So it's a violation, and we work with the mainly with the monitoring equipment to locate such interferences, because we need to protect licensed users and other users for IMT. I hope that answers and covers your question. If there's something else that I didn't cover, please let me know.
Okay, so other, that's all. Okay, so he's asking about, does CITC have some plan for coverage countryside, like rural areas? Is that clear? The question is clear?
Yes, Maad, do you have an answer, or do you want me to take this?
Yes. For the previous question, if I may add, Ayman, CITC in coordination with the service providers in the kingdom offered, I would call it a legal signal booster for the end users, so everyone can buy this equipment and without receiving any complaints from the service provider or other users of mobile. In regards to the rural areas question, there is different projects in the kingdom which are sponsored by the government to facilitate and foster telecom services in the rural areas. This project started in about 2010 and is continuing to offer to cover the kingdom. CITC recently also has published about publish statements about the national roaming of the kingdom, which allows mobile users to benefit from the other companies, for example, CITC using Zain or Mobile, or the opposite.
Other questions?
One more question about replacing all services with how the process replace new services.
So the frequencies you mean?
Yes.
So it's asking about replacing new services with old services in terms of frequencies. For example, a frequency that is assigned to 5G and it was previously assigned to another services. How do you do this frequency reassignment?
Yes, evaluation for the service that will be dismantled.
I'm sorry?
Evaluation for the service that will be dismantled.
Discontinued, you mean?
Yes.
And also the evaluation of services that should be discontinued.
Excellent question. This happens all the time. For example, the shutoff of 3G. Everyone now talks about the shutoff of 3G. As some of you know that by the end of 2022, that 3G will be totally shut down in the kingdom and replaced mostly by 4G. So this shutdown is coordinated with CITC. Each service provider coordinates with CITC to make I would call it the technological replacement of the in mobile services. In regards to the other services beyond IMT, there is a refarming plan that each spectrum licensee has to coordinate with the CITC in order to replace these services if it affects the public. Otherwise, some of the spectrum licensing has a limited or a period of license. It extends to 15 or 20 years in some cases.
If you also allow me to add, Moath, sometimes decisions on what new spectrum should be added for certain services is done with as we mentioned, through the WRC. They finalize the studies done. So we have a 3-4 year cycle. They study current needs, future needs. Maybe they identify the need for new spectrum for, like let's say, 5G or other services. And then during the WRC, this is all discussed and until a consensus is made. Then the regulations are updated. And part of that regulation we follow is then we plan how we can follow that regulation and start or plan the refarming process.
Thank you. So there is another question also about the satellite spectrum. So the satellite spectrum, for example, it is utilized in different or covers different countries. So who pays the fees and pays for whom?
Thank you for the question. In regards to the satellite, firstly, it's coordinated by its country or administration, which is the spectrum regulator, represent the companies that file the registration of these satellite services, and the fees are coordinated through the operators with the regulator along with the ITU. So it's I would call it complicated process that extends to in some cases to 7 years.
To get the license for a certain channel to be broadcasted over a certain area that covers many countries, you mean?
Yes, the coverage area of the countries and the location of the satellite and the broadcasting also technology, all of these parameters need to be assigned through the regulator with the ITU before launching the service.
Any more questions? Yes.
you elaborate more about the relation between CITC and the Arabsat stakeholder, which is the satellite operator here in Saudi, the headquarters in Riyadh?
Arabsat is, is a satellite operator. They have satellite, and they, for us, they're a stakeholder, and they're also a customer that needs spectrum, and they have a license to use it. We work. I'm sure there's other work with them when we consider coordination of satellite access and satellite orbits passing, covering certain countries. That's as far as I know the collaboration with them. That's my understanding of the situation.
Yes.
CITC performing any frequency exposure tests and
So asking about the exposure tests for harmful like exposure for humans. You do any tests for that RF exposure to make sure that the limits are in accordance with ICNIR values and these international values?
Yes, actually, yeah. Electromagnetic exposure is a very important concern that we handle. Part of that, we this year also issued a consultation on setting the EMF levels in Saudi, and we have received a good response on them. As soon as that document and the regulation is also published, we also do measurements on certain areas to show that such systems are safe, not harmful, and we're also following international standards when we set the EMF regulations in Saudi.
So are these measurements upon concern or upon request, or it is regularly done everywhere in Saudi Arabia? So you have regularly for every base station that is deployed and stuff like that?
I don't think we can cover every base station that is deployed. However, we have routine monitoring sessions and inspections. When we notice that there's abnormal levels of emission, it's a cause of concern, and then we follow the proper procedure to try and locate whether it's maybe someone unauthorized to use it, or maybe there's issue with the installation of the antenna. It's not, or the power is set too high. This is something then we take with the authority responsible for that. And this starts with the routine inspections, and in some cases, if someone reports interference, we catch some other incidents during that inspection.
Dr. Hisham, there are questions in the chat.
Okay, so can you read them?
Okay, the first question is...
yeah, I can read the questions.
Okay.
I think I read the questions from Dr. Suhail. I would like to comment on when new dimension being added to the spectrum management of Saudi Arabia, which is the enablement of research and innovation. Actually, have KFUPM as one of our collaborator in the advisory team of the spectrum. We have Dr. Ali Mgabel as one of the variable member. And I think we're adding now research and innovation dimension to managing the spectrum, which is comes to what Dr. Suhail has asked. Yes, we will go through spectrum management, access and management, especially with likely licensing regimes. So we're taking this in our consideration. Plus, we are also now a partner with Spectrum X, which is a big initiative. Actually, it's a huge initiative run by the NSF. So we are adding research and innovation to the way that we manage our spectrum. Soon we will ask for a proposal for certain issues and challenges that need to be solved through research and innovation. And Dr. Ali actually is aware of that. So this is to answer what Dr. Suhaila is asked.
There's another question Dr. Abdullah the colleagues is from Mr. Salah Mahmoud is saying about the new spectrum auction intended to be issued in end of 2021. What is the direction or selection of business model in general? You have answer for that?
Yeah. I can. I want to take it, Dr. Abdullah. Sorry.
I think Ayman and Moath will be the best to answer this question.
Okay. Actually, auctions are a function of the spectrum services, so I think I can offer some insights. Earlier, I think about 1 month ago or 2 months, we issued an information memorandum on the auction for this year, where we highlighted the bands that we intend to auction. As you know, most we as CITC tend to be technology neutral. So in certain bands, we don't specify that this band has to have certain services. Maybe IMT is a little exception from that because of the global harmonization, but we tend to follow that direction. The auction for this year is in the range of 2.1 gigahertz. I think it's about 10 megahertz blocks, 10 megahertz blocks, or maybe 5 megahertz blocks. The information memorandum is published publicly on the CITC website, and we have already received responses from stakeholders that want to be part of the auction, where they want to use that spectrum to offer services in Saudi. We have noticed that most of them are, satellite-based or satellite-based services, and that's what we have seen. We have still reviewed their inputs, their concerns, and then after that we will work with them to have the auction set.
Can I ask?
Yeah.
Thank you. Can I ask questions or just?
Yes, of course.
So maybe it's a basic question, but for new technologies like 6G, are these determined by the technology and the hardware coming from the operators, or the other extreme, operators need to adapt their hardware with the country? So is the question clear? For example, if 6G is coming, and I would think that the technology and the hardware is already set for a certain bandwidth. And so my question is, for example, like in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, do we select bands according to these hardwares and try to adapt to them, or usually we have our plans and then the operator is required to adapt with these plans? So is the question clear or not?
I think it's the answer.
You allow me, Ayman?
Yes, go ahead.
I'm not answering specifically for 6G, but I will take an example for 5G. Usually, it's a mixture of both, and this spectrum that is intended to be licensed to specific technology needs to be coordinated at the WRC. So it's neither actually, not the regulator which decide the specific spectrum band, nor the manufacturer or the operator.
Okay.
So actually it's a mixture of both approaches that need to be met and decided in the ITU, and the uses of the same frequency bands is actually very important between the countries, especially in geographically areas such as the Gulf country.
Thank you.
I think yes, this is what WRC all about, and this is why like countries and operators and also vendors are willing to contribute to the WRC so that they can show their interest, because in the end it's a consensus. So everybody there trying to shape the spectrum and trying to allocate the spectrum, and then when the consensus happens, it is published, and then everybody like start when the vendors start kind of doing or manufacture their equipment, and then it works on that specified frequencies.
Dr. Hisham, I think we're reaching to 1 hour. Is this planned time or where?
Yeah, we still have like 10 minutes.
I mean, for the class or for the webinar?
Plus, yeah, for the class, yeah, we have still 15 minutes, so we have some couple of questions. Can we take them?
Yeah, I mean, if Dr. Abdullah and Ayman can wait for a few minutes.
For KVPM, we can do that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, only like 2 questions from my side. Okay, so I would like to like have a comment on the technology neutral service specific license and the technology neutral service neutral license. Okay, so I have seen that from your document that you are moving towards this technology neutral service neutral license. Is that right?
I would say yes. We are, I would say in some bands where we have different uses that we expect someone to use in. So we don't specify a specific use, except maybe for like recognized international bands, for example, aeronautical communication or maritime. We don't expect someone to use that spectrum for different systems or different technology. But we are following having we can have multiple different types of services using the same band because we did not specify a band for one technology.
Okay. So my last question is about MVNO. So the mobile virtual networks license. Okay, so after you give this license for the virtual operators like Virgin and those kind of networks, do you then somehow regulate or monitor their agreement with the service provider? For example, they will go to STC and buy some equipment, buy some frequencies, and operate on their equipment. So does this considered as secondary trading, or you monitor this, or you leave it between them, or what?
Do you mean, Dr. Hisham, the relation between the virtual and mobile operator?
Yeah, so the virtual, they take the license, but they don't have equipment nor frequencies. And then they go to STC or mobile and stuff like that, and try to use their equipment, maybe buy some frequencies, buy some equipment, and they operate. Do you monitor this process, or it's up to them?
The governance between the virtual and mobile operator are governed by CITC, but not relevant to spectrum. So in relevant to consumer protection and other aspects, but in relevant to spectrum, no, because they don't have spectrum, and they rely on the infrastructure of the mobile operator, STC or mobile or Zain.
But this is not considered a second trading of spectrum?
A second trading when they sell or lease, when they transfer or lease their spectrum to a virtual operator. So when the other virtual operator build its own network, in this case, we would call it, yes, secondary trading, but it's not the case. The current infrastructure here in the kingdom are owned currently now by the service provider itself, not by the virtual providers.
So I guess, thank you so much for your time. I'd like to thank you for this presentation and bearing this time for our questions. And thank you so much. Okay.
Thank you, Dr. Abdullah. Thank you, Dr. Ayman, Mr. Moath. It's a pleasure to have you in this seminar or this webinar. I think we are learning a lot from the presentation. I'd like to thank all the audience, the physical and attending online. Thanks to Dr. Hisham for the coordination arrangement and for the efforts you're doing for the course. So also there is, I think, Dr. Saad also shared in the chat a link to our graduate program where we have Master of Wireless Communication Networks, which includes EE 584, Spectrum Regulation Management and Policies. So thank you all. Thank you, Dr. Hisham. Thank you, Dr. Abdullah, and everybody for their time and efforts.
Many thanks, doctors. Many thanks to the student. And we're glad also all the way to collaborate with KVPM. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you. So we can leave the session, Dr. Hisham. Thank you. شكرا دكتور. شكرا مهندس أيمن ومهندس معاذ. السلام عليكم.
شكرا لكم.
السلام.